a red flag flying here.
Hello, welcome to Socialist Think Tank. Today we are here with Matt Zarb-Cousin. Hello, Matt.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. So I'm going to start the way I always start these. What is socialism to you?
Well, socialism to me it's not a set of values so much as it's an economic system that empowers the working class, empowers working people. At the moment, our economic system works for the bosses. It works for the people at the top, people that own capital, own property, that own businesses. And socialism is about empowering people to take ownership of their communities, their workplaces, and their lives. And that's really fundamentally what we want to do. We want to enact a shift in power and wealth, a fundamental shift to the majority of people, rather than the situation we've got at the moment with capitalism, where more and more wealth and power is being diverted to the top, and obviously the rich are getting richer. We've seen in the pandemic, we've seen in the last few months, the billionaires have got even richer, and this has obviously accelerated what's been happening already, which is a huge disparity between the people that create the wealth, the workers, and the people that own the businesses and own the property.
So it's interesting that you've gone into the economic system that's around socialism. So what is it you think that makes like kind of owning wealth more valuable than doing work? Because it does seem to be that work doesn't really seem to be as connected to money as it should be.
Well, exactly. I think if we want a productive economy and we want employment, then I think it's, fundamental to that is having an economic system where people get paid for working, and the proceeds of economic growth go to those that create the wealth, to the workers, rather than people that just own property or own businesses or own a stake in businesses. We want to, I think, move beyond what's been developed really, I think, in the last 30, 40 years, this kind of rentier capitalism, where people seem to be able to own enough to opt out of the economic system by just generating passive income. I think that's a very, very dangerous situation, and what it's led to is what we're seeing now so for example, in the private rented sector, where people are spending a huge proportion of their salary after tax on paying their rent and paying someone else's mortgage or paying towards someone else's living standards. And I think this is obviously a completely undesirable system. I mean, I don't know why anyone would want to defend this. It's only the people at the top, the beneficiaries, that do that, but they're the ones with the political power and the political influence. So I find, I think any economic system that benefits the majority of people has to make work pay. I mean, that is that's a fundamental, and work can only pay if you empower the workers, and if you reduce inequality, if you give workers a say in how their businesses are run, if there's redistribution of wealth through the taxation system, if there's affordable housing, all of these things, I think, they're all interlinked, and fundamentally what you want to do is drive up the material conditions and the living standards of the majority. And to go back to this point, there's absolutely no defense for an economic system that taxes work more than it taxes wealth.
I love seeing dogs in the background. It's absolutely brilliant. No, that's great. It's always good to see. So so what is it that you think what's wrong with the system now that allows people to just simply own things, and then that will generate its own value? So owning things seems to generate more money than doing things or creating things or or being productive, whether that's kind of helping the economy by saving people's lives, making them healthy, or educating them, or whether that's actually producing something or entertaining. Why is it that, like I said, the MP in my constituency, which is gone Tory, owns 16 houses? I think he's the biggest landlord in Parliament at the moment. And he's got all this generated income from that. Why is it that should be more valuable than actually producing something good? Because he's not producing anything. People are just living there.
Yeah, well, exactly. There is no justification for this. This is absurd. And yeah, I mean, it's sustained by the economic, obviously the benefits of that kind of practice are, I mean, you just said it yourself, the economic status quo is sustained by the fact that people, even in Parliament, are benefiting from it. And the Conservative Party obviously is fundamentally the political wing of the economic status quo. It's all of their friends and funders who benefit from the system as it is, so they want to protect it. And that's it. It's just, it's not, this is why I think we've become so far removed from the value of someone's output and how productive someone is, and the amount of money that they earn. There's just become that. There's been such a detachment between those two things. How can a landlord who owns 16 properties, who's obviously a multi-millionaire off the back of that, how is that more productive and more beneficial to society than what a nurse does or what a teacher does? Or what anyone does. I mean, they're not doing anything, as you say. So, I mean, that's where I think something's gone very badly wrong. If you're designing an economic system, why would you incentivize things like buy-to-let? Why would you incentivize, landlordism and give people a means to kind of generate passive income? Like, why would you do that off the back? Because ultimately, the passive income is not coming from nowhere. That your MP's income is coming from people who work and pay rent, and they're not able to spend that money in the economy, which would be better. That would drive growth, because they're spending so much of their income on rent, and that's going probably into this MP's bank account where he's not actually, spending it or anything. So you've probably got more money than he can spend. So that's not good for society. That's not good for individuals. It's not good for communities. Like, there's no good that comes of it other than the self-interest, for the self-interest of the people who own the property and who own the wealth.
So, like, from what you're saying, it's pretty obvious, really, isn't it? It's pretty obvious that, like, morally, we should be thinking this system isn't right, this system isn't working. When did you start to realize that, like, in your life? Was it a recent thing, or have you always felt that that's the way things should be? And when did you start, like, kind of identifying as a socialist, I suppose?
I think when I was in recovery from gambling addiction. So when I was 16, I got addicted to fixed odds betting terminals, and then over a period of 4 years, got like pretty badly addicted. Lost in the region of about 20 grand. Got into a lot of debt. Was in a very bad way. I was suicidal. I felt like this, gambling had sort of ruined my life, and I'd lost all the money I could get my hands on. When I had access to, it completely dominated like my life for 4 years. It was just everything went out the window as a result of gambling. And when I was in recovery from that, thankfully I was able to get treatment. I started to see the world a bit differently. I started to sort of take myself out of society almost, and like had a more of a bird's eye view of things. You sort of ask yourself quite existential questions in recovery. And so I was sort of asking like I sort of looked at life and at society and at the economic system from a kind of outsider's perspective, which was the first time I'd done that. It sort of changed my worldview a little bit. And I started asking questions as a result of that about, why why did it happen? Not why did it happen to me, but like, why does that happen? Who designed the policy that allowed machines in betting shops that enable stakes of up to £100 every 20 seconds? Who thought that was a good idea? How did that happen? These were decisions that were made. There was a protagonist involved in that, whether that was the industry or the acquiescence of the government. There was a story and there was a reason behind why that happened. And and it was a 2005 Gambling Act, you know, all that kind of stuff. I won't go into all that, but you know, there was the point is there was a reason. These things didn't happen. They weren't arbitrary. They weren't, you know, there was a reason why. Equally, start to look at the economy in the same way. The economy has been designed in that way. This is a man-made thing. This has been, you know, this can be in the same way that it's been designed. It can be redesigned. It can be reprogrammed. These things aren't arbitrary. You don't have to accept the way things are. That was the way I started thinking. And that's really what led me down this way, because it wasn't just the kind of, part of recovery is like you start to like get your life back and start to, you know, think about things other than money and chasing losses and gambling and all that sort of stuff. So I started to like see the world in a different way anyway. But like definitely in recovery, it was like, oh my God, all these things are the way they are for a reason. There's a reason for this. And the reason, unfortunately, is vested interests trying to protect the status quo. That's generally the reason. Or people trying to exploit other people to make profit. That's usually the reason.
That's really, really incredible. Like to think that, you know, that's it. And thanks for being so frank about that. It's really nice to hear a story, and I'm so glad that you've recovered and you were able to recover. The idea that moving away from like reality, I suppose, or our version of reality, gave you a different perspective on that. Do you think that people just don't have time to stop? People are so busy trying to chase the rent or make sure that they've got enough to feed the families, that they don't really have time to think about the system, and they don't have time to understand the system. So they're just listening to an odd soundbite here and there from the press and think, well, you know, that's what I heard on the news, so it must be true, or you know, that person's opinion that I've just heard on the BBC, for example, like, oh, that must be right. And then they go back to their lives and then don't really realize that they have the ability to change their own outcomes by getting more involved, or by voting a different way, or by trying to do different things, getting involved in direct action and so on. You think that maybe people are just a bit too close to life sometimes, and they need that distance and that perspective?
Yeah, I don't blame people at all. I mean, that's absolutely true. I think this is why I think so many students, some people got to have the benefit of being at university for a few years. They sort of tend to have more left-wing politics, and they emerge, graduate or whatever. So this is because I think they do have that space to reflect on society and on life, and I think, you know, I completely agree with you. I mean, even graduates who come out of university and get into employment and struggling to pay the rent or whatever. That, I mean, it's not just non-graduates that we're talking about here. It's absolutely the case. I think that it's our responsibility as Labour Party members of the Labour movement, people who have the benefit of time compared to a lot of other people. Well, I acknowledge my own privilege. You know, I'm able to spend time doing activism and getting involved. It's our job to communicate that to people who perhaps don't have the time, and it's our job to convince people that it's in their material interest to vote Labour. And I felt like in 2017 we did a very good job of that. I know we didn't win the election, so the biggest swing to Labour since 1945, you know, in terms of vote share. And I felt like we did that very well. It was like, if you vote Labour, we're going to tax these people, and it's going to pay for this thing, and it's going to improve your life. And it was very simple. And the policies are very popular. and they polled very well. And the communication of those policies was, I thought, exceptional. And I think that's the root. It's that people become engaged in politics, the people you're talking about, in the kind of 3 months before the general election starts. Like that's when, like 3 months before general elections due to start, and then obviously in the short campaign 6 weeks before, that's when people start to think, okay, I'm going to stop hating politicians for 6 weeks because everyone hates politicians normally, which is fine. And I'm going to think positively about who to vote for. And then that's when you've got people in that, I think in psychology, they call it a teachable moment, where the people are actually willing to listen and receptive. And then that's when I think the work has to happen. It didn't work in December, and that was because of, I think, multiple reasons. Obviously, it was the election defined by Brexit. But Jeremy's popularity, sadly, had declined considerably since 2017. There's lots of reasons. But I felt like in 2017, it was a good case study of how even like recognition of Labour policy was pretty high, even among people who weren't particularly engaged in politics, like the sort of people that you referred to.
I think in 2017 there was certainly a thing that defined the Labour Party campaign was hope. It was a very, very hopeful campaign, and there was also a very organic way of people sharing information. I was speaking about someone with someone recently, where you would always see, like, there would always be a viral video going around from the Labour Party or from Momentum or a speech or something would always be going around being shared organically, and that didn't happen in 2019. Do you think that was something like fundamentally changed about social media, or was there a less hopeful message, or is it just like a mix of all different things?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think the Facebook algorithm really killed Labour in 2019. I felt like, I mean, they did better on Facebook. So, I mean, I don't want to like myth make or anything, but it wasn't just about Labour. It was about, for example, the Independent newspaper in 2017. Newspapers have their own pages, and in 2017, content from pages appeared in people's news feeds. So when the Independent newspaper did, one of the very few, gave us fair coverage, did an announcement on Labour's policy, it would just like go viral. That news story would go viral on Facebook through organic sharing. Jeremy's page obviously had far more followers in 2019 compared to 2017. It had a lot more reach. However, I think the lack of organic sharing, as you described, and the lack of social endorsement because of the algorithm change, which, just for people that don't know, is what they did was they changed the algorithm. So instead of seeing content from pages, you would then see content from your friends instead. So that was what they tried to do after 2017 in response to, I think, a lot of pressure from various sources about, the role of Facebook in elections. And that definitely hurt us. So, I mean, I think that the Conservatives as well, they sort of realized that there were lots of other platforms that people were engaging on. There was obviously, they had a whole strategy dedicated to YouTube. They bought like loads of advertising on YouTube. They really colonized that whole kind of, I'd say the ancillary social media platforms. So YouTube, Snapchat, they had something on Instagram. They had everything, really, everything covered off. Spotify, I think they had something on. Like, really, they were getting everywhere, and they were using their financial power to outcompete Labour in these platforms, and we couldn't use our organic sharing power because our wings were clipped. So I don't think we could really compete with them, sadly.
So you mentioned a little bit about normal media and print media there, and we've also got the television media that was incredibly hostile for a couple of years up to 2017, and then everything swung around when the live debates came around. I remember people getting very, very angry that Jeremy Corbyn might insist on not nuking someone, which was like absolutely preposterous. And I believe there was a young, I think she may have been a nurse, but I'm not quite sure, who said why would you want to obliterate all these people? And then that seemed to be a real clear moment for me where everything changed, where we were allowed to laugh at the ridiculous nature, where it's considered to be more sensible to do a genocide than it is to say, well, actually, I'd rather not do a genocide. Thank you very much. So like in that campaign, things really, really changed around. Did you feel that yourself at the time?
Yeah, definitely. I felt like we were the centre ground. We were the true centre ground, not centrism, quote unquote. This is where the public centre of gravity was. Reverse the Tory cuts. No illegal war, accept the result of the referendum, but negotiate a deal that doesn't damage the economy. Like, I just felt like we were right on the pulse. And John McDonnell always says, like, if the campaign went on two more weeks, we would have won. And that's true. If we didn't start from such a low baseline, we would have also won. And we wouldn't have started from such a low baseline if in the 2 years prior, we didn't have a leadership challenge from the other political wing of capital, the Parliamentary Labour Party, or sections of it anyway. And we didn't, have, I think, negative, not just the leadership challenge, but constant negative briefing and attacks from Labour MPs who wanted to get rid of Jeremy, who were quite happy to forego the opportunity of a Labour government if it meant getting rid of Jeremy, but that was the priority. Which might, to people watching, might sound bizarre, but that's sadly the truth. The truth is that if you have there's two main political parties in Britain, and only two parties have an opportunity, really, under the voting system we have, to form a government. So if one of those parties is led by an individual who wants to reform fundamentally the economic system to give more power and wealth to workers and to ordinary people, and take it away from powerful people who live off and exploit the work of others, then that person is going to come up against a massive wall of resistance, not just from the media, from vested interests, or from the Conservative Party, but also from his own party, who see themselves as almost the gatekeepers to our democratic system. And that is sadly, that sadly explains why so many of them are vehemently opposed to the left. And they see it as their responsibility to keep the left out of leadership. And they succeeded in, I think, preventing a Labour government in 2017.
So at the moment, we're seeing, like, in around the world, we're seeing quite a lot of anti-establishment feeling, and it seems to me that the right have got hold of that with reactionary policies, with racist immigration policies, and so on. Like Donald Trump, prime example there. And then Labour were bucking the trend in the UK by actually saying, well, no, our anti-establishment nature will be actually break down the things that are wrong with the establishment and start to work for people. Why do you think there was so much resistance from within the Labour Party to shift from what a lot of people said was the centre ground, certainly the Parliamentary Labour Party anyway, because that's a very distinct thing from the membership of the Labour Party, because the membership of the Labour Party were very much in favour of a transformative agenda. So what was it in the Parliamentary Labour Party that made them want to resist that change?
I think many feel themselves loyal first and foremost to the British state. I think they believe, as I said before, like that they see themselves as almost the gatekeepers to the democratic system, and loyal to the British state means loyal to the interests of the British state, which is advancing the interests of vested interests in the capitalist system. So that's the way they see themselves. As part of the establishment. That's an easier way of putting it. They see themselves as that, and Jeremy's not part of the establishment. He is against the establishment. He wants to change things. So yeah, that's one reason. Another reason is they didn't see the ground moving around them. They didn't see that there was a shift in public sentiment, not just in Britain, but across the world. They still didn't see it even after Trump won. They thought that was because of Russia and because of dodgy dark ads on Facebook. They didn't see that actually, and Brexit as well. They still didn't see like this. That's sort of Cambridge Analytica. That's not anything to do with a reflection of how people are feeling. So yeah, I think applying very outdated principles to their understanding of the political context was definitely one of the reasons. But also, I feel like they are not just ideologically, but culturally opposed to the left. Like it's like a hobby horse for them. It's like it's how they define themselves. They define their politics as being not the left, not democratic socialists, but what they call social democrats. But actually, it's not really social democracy. If anything, the left has saved social democracy as it's it's properly understood.
I often find it interesting when people refer to themselves as moderate, and there's this like air of pragmatism. Now, I actually think the left have been very, very pragmatic and have compromised quite a lot over the past few years. And for me, the people who define themselves as moderates absolutely will not compromise with, say, the neoliberal agenda. They'll not like move away from that whatsoever. And there are so many things that they won't compromise on. So why is it that they get to call themselves moderates?
Yeah, good question. I mean, there's nothing moderate about them. I mean, they like bombing, and they like doing what's best for the financial sector. They're not interested in regional development. They're not interested in government investment. They're not interested in really, these are, a lot of them are pro privatization in the NHS. Like they're miles away from the center of gravity of public opinion. And that's what the left has to, I think, recognize and always keep in the forefront of their minds, is that we have public opinion on our side. The policies that we want to advance, are popular. And those causes are all popular. And actually, I know from my work in doing gambling reform, the public are very pro-regulation. The public are very wary about corporations, and they're very wary about how companies behave, and they're very wary about tax avoidance, and all of these things that are aligned to our interests. And really what you want to do as a political party or a movement or campaigners, foreground the things that you think are going to resonate the most, things that you believe in, but are going to resonate the most with the people you're trying to appeal to. So you mentioned before how the right have made, ethno-nationalism and anti-migrant sentiment, all of that stuff, that triggers an emotional response in people, which they believe in. They want to foreground that as their kind of anti-establishment politics because it's effective. We need to foreground the things that trigger an emotional response that are effective and that we believe in. And those things tend to be corporate abuse, tax avoidance. I think obviously at the moment, like how dodgy deals have been done between the government and private sector contractors, how the private sector has really undermined the response to COVID, and there's my cat, and and yeah, I think obviously like the injustice of our social security system. I mean, lots of people now are going to be, I think, coming into contact with our benefit system for the very first time after the pandemic. And as a result of that, he just wants to say hello. No, he doesn't. As a result of that, I think we're going to pick up a lot of people who feel like they've paid into the system, paying the taxes all my life, and not getting anything back when they're falling on hard times. You know, I think that there is going to be an opportunity to really articulate a new form of social security in the next year or so, and the left has to be at the forefront of that, and it has to, and the Labour Party has to be as well. It can't just sit back and scrutinise the government on its own terms. It has to put forward these new alternative models. And yeah, the Labour Party should be at the forefront of articulating these alternative models, absolutely. And you know, whether that's universal basic income or whether that's a better allocation of benefits and reform of the welfare system, so it doesn't you know, act as a mode of abuse to people who have fallen on hard times. I think that is absolutely an opportunity for the left, but we have to try to articulate it in a way that really speaks to that injustice, and that's what triggers the emotional response, and that's what kind of brings people with us.
So one thing that's like you've mentioned a lot, we've got public opinion on our side. Most people do agree with left-wing policies, and I think like on the doorstep I've done a lot of this, and people, it's really easy to find common ground when you get into a conversation with someone. You know, they may immediately speak about what's in the news that day, but you can very easily find something, or the cuts to the school down the road, or you know, you can find common ground very, very quickly. And I think you're absolutely right. So why is it that we're in a position where the media are so far away? I don't really like the term mainstream media because it sounds a bit Trumpian now, because he picks up a lot of the terms that the left would use. But so why are the mainstream media so far away from public opinion in what they push? And why is it, do you think, that you know, the media and a lot of the commentary out on things like Twitter and stuff talk about the left being in a bubble and in a kind of a group think kind of thing, and an echo chamber? And yet, for me, the biggest echo chamber is people arguing about the EU in Westminster for those couple of years when that was completely dominant and it wasn't anything to do with anyone's lives. And in fact, when you spoke to people on the doorstep locally, for me, you would find that once you got them off that topic, they aren't interested in it at all. You know, they weren't interested in it at all. And that was in Sedgefield, which I think Brexit lost us the election here. However, when you spoke about other things, they weren't that interested in Brexit at all. So why is it that they focus on these very narrow things? And how do we sort of challenge that and get people to talk about things that really do matter to their lives?
Yeah, so I think actually the Get Brexit Done message, you don't have to be a supporter of Brexit to support getting Brexit done. You don't have to care about Brexit. In fact, if you don't care about Brexit, you also want to get Brexit done. That was the genius of that slogan. It was brilliant because it actually, you know, it captured both. And really that constituency of people, that demographic of people who weren't that interested and just wanted it over with and thought, you know, we had the referendum already, why do we want another one? They were the majority. And yes, absolutely. I mean, the media's priorities, I think, have just been massively skewed by not just being in London, but I think the lobby system in Westminster, I don't think it's very conducive to reflecting the priorities of people. I think when you've got political reporters who effectively just work and spend all their time in Westminster in Parliament, they lose touch with what people think, and you know, they just end up reinforcing their own prejudices and their own assumptions about how people think and what their priorities are and how people live in their lives. You know, it's so insular, Westminster. There's no place like it in the country. It's very, very strange. It's like a simulacrum. You know, it's like a film set. You know, it's a very, very strange place. And yeah, I just feel like that's part of the reason, the cultural detachment but also um, uh, the media has its own agenda. The media is owned, and well, many newspapers are owned by billionaires who live in tax havens who don't pay tax. They have their own agenda. Those newspapers are, tend to be very right wing. That's their kind of own political agenda. They're going to focus on those things, on the things that resonate with a right wing agenda. And I think what's happened in particularly the last 10 years, is yes, people have become tired of austerity, and they feel like it's gone on for too long, and they feel like it's the government has to take responsibility at some stage. It can't just blame the predecessors or blame the banking crisis. It has to actually advance the country at some stage. But at the same time, I feel like there's a lot of fatalism. So people have kind of grown a bit tired of politicians not keeping their promises and not delivering. So it's a double-edged sword. I felt like in 2017, Corbyn had a credible platform that gave people hope. As you mentioned earlier, it was hope because it was credible. It was like, this guy said he's going to do all this stuff, and I believe him. I believe he's going to do it. And he's being attacked because vested interests oppose what he stands for. There was a story about all of that, right, that I thought people bought into. And it's true. And I feel like now, particularly in 2019, it was like we were making all these promises, but A, people didn't believe that Jeremy could deliver them for whatever reason. And B, it was just like too many, so too much stuff, too many things, when schools haven't got enough money to buy textbooks. Do you know what I mean? It's beyond the comprehension of people. To think about all of these things that are possible. So our job as socialists, as people in the labour movement, is to explain and convince people that these things are possible, that vested interests don't always win, and that all of the advances that we've made as a country, the weekend, the minimum wage, the NHS, everything, right, has been because we've demanded it as the people and as a labour movement. We've demanded those things. They've not just happened arbitrarily. They're advances that we've made, and convincing people that there are still advances to be made, and they can be made rapidly. And in some cases, they absolutely have to be made rapidly because of the climate crisis, is our job. And I think we can do it.
Right, so I'm going to really put you on the spot here with exactly how would we go about that. So how would we make sure that we have a socialist future, and what can we do, just like small steps that we could do to move towards doing that? Because at the moment we've got a long time before a potential next general election. We don't know what the Labour platform policy is going to be and how socialist it's going to be at that point. So what can we do short term and to try and build up that socialist feel, and that socialism's a good thing. Socialism can be a positive influence in your life.
So I think as we live in a system, a democratic system, that has a first past the post voting system. And because of that, there are only two parties that can form a government. So the only way you can advance socialism is within the Labour Party. So I would recommend that people join the Labour Party, always. Not because not because, I don't know, just because it is the only platform, the only vehicle that you can advance socialism and socialist policies. So that'll be the first thing. And then obviously we want to try to influence Labour and steer them in a particular direction. So there's two ways of doing that. Within the Labour Party is engaging with obviously voting in left candidates into positions such as the National Executive Committee, getting involved in various affiliates like Young Labour, and trying to advance socialism within the Labour Party. And there's also moving the ground around the Labour leadership. So if I don't know what your expertise is. Someone's expertise is, for example, in climate policy, it is trying to advance a particular policy outcome related to that. Or it depends, really. I mean, there's lots of things. What I'm trying to do at the moment is get the Labour Party to shift its policies on gambling reform. And obviously, I'm able to run a single issue campaign. I'm very fortunate in that respect. But that's kind of an example. I mean, as it happens, I think we're getting somewhere with the government. But I think it's possible to advance. It's possible to advance socialist outcomes and particular policies outside the confines of the Labour Party. But you're only really going to advance socialism and the means to deliver that fundamental and irreversible shift of wealth and power, if you're in the Labour Party and you're working towards getting a Labour government that has a socialist agenda.
In the build-up to Corbyn's election as Labour Party leader, the People's Assembly Against Austerity seemed to be the only real voice that was speaking out, because at the time Labour was adopting a policy that was kind of like austerity light. It wasn't as bad as what the Conservatives were going to do it slower, but was definitely going to be austerity, which actually economically doesn't necessarily need to happen. It's a choice. You can invest if you want to, as we've seen during this recent crisis. But at the moment, we're seeing a lot of corruption in the Tory government, in who they're giving coronavirus contracts to. They're giving it's all cronyism. They're giving these contracts to their friends, and there's these mind-boggling amounts of money that are flying around. So do you think there's any kind of hope in an idea of building maybe a People's Assembly against corruption, which would also kind of blow that whole system wide open? Because it's not just coronavirus, that's just exposed it. These contracts have been going to their friends for a long time. It's just, we're interested in it at the moment, and the figures are higher than they've ever been. So do you think there's anything like kind of a grassroots movement in that respect that could really help advance the cause of socialism?
Yeah, I really like that idea. Yeah, but I think what we have to do is, it's not just like a few rotten apples. We have to show why this is like structurally inevitable. Why is it inevitable that the government is having to give these contracts out? And it's inevitable because the state, the British state, and what it's capable of doing has been hollowed out, because all of the expertise has left, gone and work in the private sector. The functions of the state have been reduced. So what the government can do has been significantly, it's had its wings clipped, basically, right? So this is why you end up with companies like Carillion. Carillion doesn't actually do anything. It's apart from procurement. So when the government asks Carillion to do something like HS2, they're basically outsourcing procurement. They're saying to a company, here's a pile of money. I mean, it's going to be like 100 billion now, right? HS2. Can you handle commissioning all of the various companies to do the job that we want you to do? That job that Carillion does and takes a massive cut for, that used to be done by the state. The state, if you had a department of infrastructure where you had people in that department who knew how to do procurement, who could get good value for money from taxpayers, I don't want to say taxpayers, but for the public. Why do we not have that? That is a solution. And the reason we don't have it is because of this, I think, ideological opposition to the state having an active role in the economy. And that is obviously a socialist objective.
And it's ridiculous as well, because we've seen so much state activity in, like, the state definitely needs to get involved in the economy. It's absolutely intrinsic to the economy. It just depends. Like, we've seen billionaires increasing their wealth by 25%, I believe, over this crisis, which to me just shows that deficits end up in billionaires' bank accounts offshore. And those deficits could end up with the people. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with the deficit, and I think education around those areas really needs to be there. But I think when people get their head around how corrupt the system actually is, I think it's mind blowing for them. I think people don't understand how deep the corruption goes. So, I suppose there'd be a way of maybe relating that to people's own work lives when they see maybe perhaps a pointless manager in their company that simply checks on whether they're doing their job and doesn't particularly do any work themselves, that kind of thing. Perhaps we could relate it to that. So, do you have any final thoughts about how we're going to go about bringing in socialism in the future, and what a socialist system would look like?
Well, it's inevitable. It's just a question of when, and it's inevitable because of the economic system and the fact that it's littered with contradictions. So, I'll just give it like a very broad example that tries to illustrate this point. It's companies are incentivized to make profit. Those profits go to the bosses and the shareholders. The shareholders get richer. And the most extreme example of this is Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon, who is one of those billionaires that you just mentioned, who's increased his wealth massively during the pandemic. Jeff Bezos relies on people buying Amazon products to get the profits. But he pays his workers nothing, next to nothing, rubbish wages, treats them terribly. If we universalize that principle of Jeff Bezos, of if Jeff Bezos is held up as, this is how you succeed in the capitalist system, and we universalize that principle across the whole system, no one's going to have enough money to buy Jeff Bezos products. So the whole system, if you look at it like that, it's an inherent contradiction. That is why it goes from crisis to crisis. And the ultimate crisis will be the ecological crisis, where you have, because of the profit motive and because of that, the interests of corporations being placed above the interests of the environment and the interests in health and well-being of the people, we're not going to have a capitalist system, because we're not going to have a human race. It will destroy itself. So, of course, I think socialism is inevitable, but we need to advance it as quickly as we can, because otherwise the planet will die. It helps that Trump's not in the White House, as much as Biden's victory probably isn't that exciting to most of us. Obviously, we're happy that Trump isn't in the White House, and I think it's going to help us advance the climate agenda. But I think it's inevitable. But I would genuinely say join the Labour Party and try to change the Labour Party from within. You are a disruptor when you join the Labour Party as a socialist. That is not its natural state, even though it should be. So if you feel hostility, it's because you're a disruptor. It's because you're trying to change something. And that's where people, that's why they should be. Whenever you threaten the status quo of anything, people resist that, but it doesn't mean you're in the wrong.
Well, thank you so much for that. And if it was easy, then we'd be the Tory party playing it on easy mode, wouldn't we? So
that's right.
Thank you so much for this, Matt. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And
it's been great. Thanks so much.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Keep the red flag flying.